Jake Morrison walked down the long hallway of Nexus Academy, his footsteps echoing off the polished metal floors. The academy was huge, with corridors that seemed to stretch forever in every direction. Students from dozens of different worlds moved around him, chattering in languages he was still learning to understand. At 22 years old, Jake was one of only 3 humans at the academy. Most days he felt like a curiosity rather than a student. Other species would stare at him with their large eyes, whispering to each other about the strange creature from the third planet of the Sol system. Some were friendly, others kept their distance. Jake had learned not to take it personally. The academy was built to accommodate many different types of beings. The ceilings were tall enough for the bird-like Kavari to spread their wings, while the floors had special grooves for species that moved on tentacles or multiple legs. Environmental controls adjusted temperature and atmosphere for each classroom based on who was attending. It was amazing technology that made Jake appreciate how far galactic civilization had come. Jake's favorite class was Advanced Xenobiology with Professor Kethver. The professor was a Xanthari, a species that looked somewhat like a cross between a deer and a giraffe, with long necks and gentle eyes. Professor Kethver had been teaching for over 200 years and knew more about alien life forms than anyone Jake had ever met. The professor's voice was soft and melodic, making even the most complex biological concepts seem simple. Today felt different, though. As Jake entered the classroom, he noticed that several students were already whispering excitedly among themselves. His friend Lyra Voss, an Alterian with blue skin and silver hair, waved him over to sit next to her. The Alterians were known for their calm nature and strong psychic abilities, but today Lyra seemed nervous. "Did you hear what Professor Kethver is planning for today?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her large purple eyes looked worried. Jake shook his head. "No, what's going on? He's bringing in a live specimen." "Something from the Omega Sector." Jake raised an eyebrow. The Omega Sector was known for having some of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. Most species avoided it completely. "What kind of specimen?" Before Lyra could answer, Professor Kethver entered the classroom. His hooves clicked against the floor as he walked to the front of the room. Today, he seemed more serious than usual. The professor's usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by something more formal and careful. "Good morning, students, Professor." Kethver began, his voice carrying across the room. "Today we will be conducting a very special lesson. We have been granted permission to observe a living example of one of the galaxy's most efficient predators." The room fell silent. Jake could see several students shifting uncomfortably in their seats. A few of the smaller species had moved closer together, as if seeking protection in numbers. "The creature we will be studying today is a void stalker. From the Omega Sector," the professor continued. "These beings represent the pinnacle of predatory evolution. They are apex hunters that have dominated their ecosystem for millions of years." Jake felt a surge of excitement. He had read about void stalkers in his textbooks, but had never imagined he would get to see one in person. They were legendary creatures known for their intelligence, speed, and deadly hunting abilities. Most species considered them to be the stuff of nightmares. "Now, I want everyone to remain calm," Professor Kethver said, noticing the growing anxiety in the room. "The creature will be contained within a specialized containment unit. The barriers are made of reinforced quantum glass and are completely secure. There is no danger to anyone in this room." Despite the professor's reassurances, Jake could see that most of his classmates were terrified. The Kavari students had their feathers puffed out in a clear sign of distress. The plant-like Verdani were swaying nervously, their leaf-covered bodies rustling with anxiety. Even the usually confident Drachneri, who resembled large lizards, seemed uneasy. Lyra leaned closer to Jake. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered. "Maybe we should ask to be excused from today's lesson." Jake looked at her with surprise. "Are you kidding? This is incredible. How often do you get to see a void stalker up close? How often do you want to see something that could kill you in a dozen different ways?" Lyra replied, her voice shaking slightly. Jake paused, considering her words. He supposed he could understand why the other students were scared. Most of their species had evolved from prey animals or peaceful omnivores. Their ancestors had survived by avoiding predators, not confronting them. The idea of being in the same room as an apex predator, even a contained one, went against millions of years of evolutionary programming. But Jake felt different. Instead of fear, he felt curiosity. He wanted to understand how the creature moved, how it thought, how it had become such a successful hunter. The scientific part of his mind was already racing with questions. Professor Kethver moved to his desk and began adjusting various controls. "I am now activating the classroom's enhanced security protocols," he announced. "The environmental systems will create multiple barrier fields around the containment unit. Emergency response teams have been notified and are standing by." Jake watched as invisible energy fields activated around the room. He could feel a slight tingling in the air as the barriers came online. The professor was clearly taking every precaution possible. "The Void Stalker is being transported from the Academy's secure research facility," Professor Kethver continued. "It should arrive within the next few minutes. While we wait, let me explain what you will be observing." The professor activated a holographic display showing a three-dimensional model of the Void Stalker. The creature was both beautiful and terrifying. It stood about 8 feet tall, with a sleek, muscular body covered in dark scales that seemed to absorb light. Its limbs were long and powerful, ending in razor-sharp claws. The head was elongated, with multiple rows of teeth visible in its partially open mouth. "The Void Stalker is what we call a perfect predator," Professor Kethver explained. "Every aspect of its biology has been shaped by millions of years of evolution to make it the ultimate hunter. Its senses are incredibly acute. It can detect prey from miles away using a combination of sight, sound, smell, and electromagnetic fields." Jake leaned forward, fascinated by the details. The creature's eyes were particularly interesting. They were large and multifaceted, suggesting excellent vision in multiple light spectrums. The muscle structure indicated incredible speed and agility. "The Void Stalker's hunting strategy is based on patience and intelligence," the professor continued. "Unlike many predators that rely on brute force, these creatures are capable of complex planning and problem-solving. They can track prey across vast distances and wait for the perfect moment to strike." As the professor spoke, Jake noticed that several students had moved to the back of the classroom as far from the front as possible. Others were checking their personal communicators, probably sending messages to friends or family. The anxiety in the room was almost tangible. "Professor," one of the Kavari students called out, her voice high and nervous, "are you absolutely certain the containment will hold?" "The containment system has been tested extensively," Professor Kethver replied. "It has held creatures far more dangerous than a single Void Stalker. You have nothing to worry about." Jake found himself wondering, what could possibly be more dangerous than a Void Stalker, but he kept the question to himself. He was more interested in the opportunity to observe the creature's behavior and learn about its biology. A soft chime sounded throughout the classroom, indicating that the specimen was about to arrive. Professor Kethver moved to the center of the room and gestured for everyone to pay attention. "Remember," he said, "observe carefully but remain quiet. Any sudden movements or loud noises could agitate the creature. We want to see its natural behavior, not its stress responses." Jake felt his heart rate increase with anticipation. In just a few moments, he would come face to face with one of the galaxy's most feared predators. He had no idea that this encounter would change everything. The heavy doors at the back of the classroom slid open with a soft hiss. 2 Academy security guards entered first, their hands resting on their weapon belts. Behind them came a team of technicians wheeling a large containment unit. The unit was about the size of a small room, made from what looked like thick, transparent metal. Blue energy fields flickered around its edges, creating a faint humming sound. Jake leaned forward in his seat, trying to get a better look. Inside the containment unit, something moved in the shadows. The other students pressed themselves against the walls, as far from the unit as possible. Even Lyra had moved her chair back several feet, her purple eyes wide with fear. "Bring it to the center of the room," Professor Kethver instructed the technicians. "Activate all barrier systems once it's in position." The technicians carefully maneuvered the containment unit into the middle of the classroom. As they worked, Jake caught glimpses of the creature inside. It was pacing back and forth, its movements fluid and graceful despite being confined. The Void Stalker seemed to be studying the room, its large eyes scanning everything with cold intelligence. "Systems are online, Professor," one of the technicians reported. "All barriers are functioning at maximum strength. The creature is secure." "Professor." Kethver nodded. "Thank you. You may return to your posts." The technicians left, but the security guards remained by the door. Jake noticed they looked nervous too, their hands never moving far from their weapons. Even the people trained to handle dangerous situations seemed uncomfortable around the Void Stalker. "Now then," Professor Kethver said, his voice carefully controlled, "let us begin our observation. What you see before you is a fully grown adult Void Stalker. This particular specimen is approximately 12 years old, which makes it a mature hunter." The creature stepped into the light and Jake felt his breath catch. It was magnificent. The Void Stalker stood 8 feet tall, its body covered in scales that seemed to shift between deep black and dark purple. Its limbs were long and powerful, built for both speed and strength. The claws on its hands and feet were at least 6 inches long, curved, and razor-sharp, but it was the creature's eyes that captured Jake's attention. They were large and intelligent, with pupils that could adjust to different types of light. Right now, they were scanning the room with methodical precision, studying each student as if cataloging potential threats or prey. "Notice the muscle structure," Professor Kethver continued, pointing at the creature with a long laser pointer. "The Void Stalker's body is designed for explosive bursts of speed. It can accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in less than 2 seconds. The creature's head turned toward the professor's voice. For a moment, it stared directly at the Xanthari, and Jake saw the professor take an involuntary step backward. Even with all the barriers in place, the predator's gaze was intimidating. "The claws serve multiple purposes," the professor went on, his voice slightly less steady than before. "They are used for climbing, gripping prey, and as weapons. Each claw is harder than most metals and can cut through materials that would stop conventional tools." Jake raised his hand. "Professor, how does it hunt? I mean, what's its strategy?" Several students turned to stare at Jake in disbelief. How could he be asking questions about hunting strategies when there was a living nightmare just a few feet away? "An excellent question," Professor Kethver replied, seeming grateful for the distraction. "The Void Stalker is what we call an ambush predator. It uses its intelligence to study its prey's behavior patterns, then strikes when the target is most vulnerable." The creature had stopped pacing and was now standing perfectly still, watching the professor. Its head tilted slightly to one side, as if it was listening to every word being said about it. "The creature's hearing is extraordinary," the professor continued. "It can detect sounds across a much wider range than most species. It can hear a heartbeat from 50 feet away, which helps it track wounded prey or detect fear in potential victims." Jake found himself wondering if the Void Stalker could hear all of their heartbeats right now. Looking around the room, he could see that most of his classmates' hearts were probably racing with terror. The creature might be getting quite an interesting audio show. "Professor," one of the Draknari students called out, "how do we know it can't break free? What if the containment fails?" "The containment system has been tested extensively," Professor Kethver assured him. "The barriers are designed to hold creatures much larger and stronger than this specimen. There is no recorded case of a Void Stalker escaping from this type of containment." The creature seemed to understand that it was being discussed. It approached the barrier closest to the professor and placed one clawed hand against the transparent wall. The energy field flickered where it touched, creating small sparks of blue light. "Fascinating," Jake muttered, standing up to get a better view. "Jake, what are you doing?" Lyra whispered urgently. "Sit down." But Jake was too interested to sit. Down, he walked closer to the containment unit, ignoring the shocked gasps from his classmates. The Void Stalker's eyes immediately locked onto him, tracking his movement with predatory focus. "Mr. Morrison," Professor Kethver said sharply, "please, return to your seat. We should maintain a safe distance." Jake stopped about 10 feet from the containment unit. The creature was studying him intently, its head moving slightly as it examined him from different angles. Jake found himself staring back, fascinated by the intelligence he saw in those alien eyes. "It's beautiful," Jake said quietly. The room fell silent. Nobody could understand how anyone could find this terrifying creature beautiful. The Void Stalker tilted its head further, as if Jake's reaction was as puzzling to it as it was to everyone else. "The bone structure is incredible," Jake continued, apparently oblivious to the shocked stares of his classmates. "Look at how the skull is designed to protect the brain while still allowing for maximum jaw strength. And the way the spine connects to the legs, it's built for perfect balance and agility." The creature pressed both hands against the barrier now, leaning closer to Jake. Its eyes never left his face. For a moment, predator and human regarded each other with mutual curiosity. "Mr. Morrison," Professor Kethver said again, "I really must insist that you return to your seat. The creature is showing signs of increased interest in you." Jake looked at the professor. "Increased interest? How can you tell?" "Look at its posture," the professor explained. "It's focused entirely on you now. That's typically the beginning of hunting behavior." Jake turned back to the Void Stalker. The creature was indeed focused on him, but Jake didn't sense aggression. It seemed more like the creature was trying to figure him out, just as he was trying to understand it. "What does it eat?" Jake asked. "I mean, what kind of prey does it prefer?" "Void Stalkers are not particularly selective," Professor Kethver replied. "They hunt whatever is available in their territory. However, they do show preferences for certain types of prey based on size, speed, and difficulty of capture." The creature made a soft sound, almost like a low growl. Several students gasped and moved even further back. But Jake noticed that the sound didn't seem threatening. It was more like the creature was trying to communicate. "Does it make different sounds for different purposes?" Jake asked. "Yes, they have a complex system of vocalizations. That particular sound is usually made when they encounter something unfamiliar. It's a questioning sound, not a threat." Jake nodded, filing away this information. The Void Stalker was still watching him, and he was watching it back. There was something almost hypnotic about the creature's gaze. Its eyes seemed to hold ancient wisdom, the knowledge of countless successful hunts. "How long do they live?" Jake asked. "In the wild, approximately 50 to 60 years. In captivity, they can live much longer due to medical care and regular feeding." The creature stepped back from the barrier and began pacing again. But Jake noticed it kept glancing at him as it moved. It was like the creature had marked him as particularly interesting among all the other students. "Professor," Lyra called out, her voice shaking, "is it normal for the creature to focus on one person like that?" Professor Kethver looked thoughtful. "Not particularly. Usually they show equal interest in all potential prey. This behavior is somewhat unusual." Jake felt a strange sense of pride at being considered unusual by such a magnificent predator. While his classmates cowered in fear, he found himself genuinely enjoying the creature's attention. There was something almost flattering about earning the interest of such a perfect hunter. The Void Stalker stopped pacing and sat down, much like a large cat might. It wrapped its tail around its feet and continued to watch Jake with those intelligent eyes. The posture was almost relaxed, as if the creature had decided that Jake was worth continued observation, but not immediate action. "Remarkable, Professor," Kethver murmured. "I've never seen a Void Stalker display such calm behavior around potential prey." Jake smiled. For the first time since arriving at the academy, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The lesson continued for another 20 minutes. Professor Kethver explained the creature's hunting patterns, its social structure, and its role in the ecosystem of the Omega sector. Jake asked question after question, each one showing his growing fascination with the Void Stalker, and the creature seemed to enjoy the attention, occasionally making soft sounds that the professor identified as expressions of interest or curiosity. The other students remained pressed against the walls, watching in disbelief as their human classmate carried on what seemed like a conversation with one of the galaxy's most feared predators. Even the security guards at the door looked puzzled by Jake's behavior. The Void Stalker's intelligence is comparable to many sentient species, Professor Kethver was saying. They can solve complex problems, use tools, and even show forms of creativity in their hunting methods. Jake nodded enthusiastically. Have they ever been known to communicate with other species? I mean, beyond just hunting behavior? There have been very few opportunities to study such interactions, the professor replied. Most encounters between Void Stalkers and other species end rather quickly and violently. The creature stood up again and approached the barrier closest to Jake. It placed one hand against the transparent wall and made a series of soft clicking sounds. Jake found himself making a similar clicking sound back. Though he had no idea why, the Void Stalker's eyes widened slightly, and it made the sound again. Jake repeated it, and the creature seemed almost pleased by the response. Extraordinary, Professor Kethver whispered. I've never seen anything like this. Suddenly, the lights in the classroom flickered. The steady hum of the containment unit wavered for just a moment before returning to normal. Everyone froze, but Professor Kethver quickly checked his control panel. Just a minor power fluctuation, he announced. Nothing to worry about. The backup systems are functioning perfectly. But Jake noticed that the creature had become more alert. Its head was raised, and it was sniffing the air as if it could detect something the others couldn't. The relaxed posture from before was gone, replaced by something more tense and focused. Professor, one of the technicians said through the room's communication system, we're showing some irregularities in the power grid. Nothing serious, but we recommend concluding the demonstration soon. Understood, Professor Kethver replied. We'll wrap up in just a few more minutes. The lights flickered again, this time staying dim for several seconds before brightening. The containment unit's energy barriers shimmered and wavered. The Void Stalker was now pacing again, but its movements were different. More purposeful. More focused. Is the containment still secure? Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, of course, Professor Kethver said, but Jake noticed he was checking his instruments more frequently now. The barriers are designed to handle much more serious power issues than this. The creature stopped pacing and moved to the center of the containment unit. It stood perfectly still, its head tilted as if listening to something only it could hear. Then, without warning, it let out a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the floor. All the students gasped and moved even further back. The sound was unlike anything the creature had made before. It was deeper, more powerful, and somehow more threatening. What was that? Jake asked, though he continued to stand close to the containment unit. A challenge call, Professor Kethver said, his voice tight with concern. They make that sound when they're preparing to fight or when they sense a threat. But what could it be sensing as a threat? Jake wondered aloud. Before the professor could answer, the lights went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing the room in red light. The containment unit's barriers flickered wildly, and alarms began sounding throughout the academy. Everyone remain calm, Professor Kethver called out, though his own voice betrayed his growing panic. The emergency systems are functioning. The containment is still secure. But as he spoke, sparks began flying from the containment unit's control panel. The energy barriers were becoming increasingly unstable, flickering on and off in rapid succession. The Void Stalker seemed to sense the opportunity. It approached the barrier wall and began examining it closely, running its claws along the surface. Where it touched, the energy field sparked and wavered. Professor, we need to evacuate the classroom immediately, one of the security guards called out. The containment system is failing. No, Professor Kethver said, frantically working at his control panel. I can stabilize it. The backup systems just need a moment to engage, but the creature had found a weakness in the barrier. It pressed both hands against a section where the energy field was particularly unstable. The barrier sparked violently. And for a brief moment, Jake could see the creature's claws actually penetrating the wall. "Everyone out!" one of the security guards shouted. "Move to the emergency exits now!" Chaos erupted in the classroom. Students scrambled for the exits, their various species' panic responses taking over. The bird-like Kavari shrieked and flapped. Their wings. The plant-like Verdani swayed wildly as they tried to move on their root-like legs. Even the usually calm Alterians like Lyra were running in pure terror. Jake found himself caught in the middle of the stampede. Bodies pressed against him from all sides as everyone fought to reach the doors. He could hear Professor Kethver still shouting instructions, but his voice was lost in the general panic. In the chaos, Jake saw Lyra stumble and fall. She had been pushed by larger students in their rush to escape and had lost her balance. She hit the floor hard, her purple eyes wide with pain and fear. "Lyra!" Jake called out, fighting against the crowd to reach her, but the other students were too panicked to notice or care. They trampled around her, focused only on their own escape. Jake pushed through the crowd, trying to get to his friend before she was seriously hurt. Behind him, he heard a sound that made his blood freeze. It was the unmistakable crack of breaking glass, followed by the loud hiss of failing energy systems. The containment unit had been breached. The screaming in the classroom reached a new level of hysteria. Students who had been moving quickly before now ran in absolute terror. The security guards were shouting orders, but nobody was listening. Jake reached Lyra, just as the last of the other students cleared the area around them. She was trying to get up, but her leg was twisted at an odd angle. When she put weight on it, she cried out in pain and collapsed again. "I think it's broken," she gasped, tears streaming down her blue face. "Jake, you have to leave me. Get out of here." Jake looked back toward the containment unit. The barriers were completely down now, and the transparent walls had several large cracks running through them. As he watched, the Void Stalker stepped back and then slammed its shoulder against the weakened barrier. The wall shattered, glass and metal scattered across the floor as the creature stepped free of its prison. It stood to its full height, stretching muscles that had been confined for too long. Its eyes swept the room, taking in the chaos and panic around it. For a moment, the creature seemed almost confused by its newfound freedom. It looked around the classroom as if trying to decide what to do next. Then its gaze fell on the fleeing students, and something primal awakened in its expression. The hunt was on. The Void Stalker's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. It took a step forward, then another, moving with the fluid grace of a born predator. Every movement was controlled and purposeful. Jake helped Lyra to her feet, supporting her weight as she favored her injured leg. The exit doors were at least 50 feet away, and with Lyra hurt, they would never make it in time. The creature's attention turned toward them. It had noticed the injured prey that couldn't run like the others. In the predator's mind, Lyra had just become the easiest target in the room. Jake felt something change inside him as the Void Stalker began moving in their direction. The creature's eyes were locked on Lyra, and Jake could see the calculation in its gaze. It was already planning its attack. "Go, Jake," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with resignation. "There's no point in both of us dying here." But Jake didn't move. Instead, he gently pushed Lyra behind him and stepped forward, placing himself directly between her and the approaching predator. The Void Stalker stopped, its head tilting slightly as it regarded this unexpected development. Why wasn't the other prey running? Why was it standing in the way? Jake stared back at the creature, his heart pounding, but his mind strangely calm. He had no weapons, no special training, and no way to fight something that had evolved to be the perfect killer. All he had was himself, and somehow that felt like enough. The Void Stalker stopped moving when Jake stepped between it and Lyra. For several long seconds, predator and human stared at each other across the broken glass and scattered debris. The creature's eyes narrowed as it tried to understand what was happening. Jake could feel his heart hammering in his chest, but his breathing remained steady. Something deep in his mind had taken over, something that felt older than his conscious thoughts. His muscles were tense and ready, but not with the panic that had driven his classmates to flee. This was different. This was focused. The creature took another step forward, testing Jake's resolve. Most prey would run when faced with a direct challenge from a void stalker. The fact that Jake remained motionless seemed to confuse the predator. Jake maintained eye contact, never looking away from the creature's face. He had read that looking away from a predator was often seen as submission, an invitation to attack. So he kept his gaze locked on those intelligent alien eyes, even as every instinct screamed at him to run. "What are you doing?" Lyra whispered from behind him. "Jake, please, just run. Save yourself." But Jake didn't respond to her words. His attention was completely focused on the void stalker. The creature had stopped advancing and was now studying him with obvious curiosity. Its head tilted from side to side as it examined this strange prey that refused to behave like prey. The void stalker made a low sound, almost like a question. Jake found himself responding with a sound of his own, a low rumble that came from somewhere deep in his throat. He had no idea why he made the sound or what it might mean, but it felt right. The creature's eyes widened slightly. It took a step back, no longer advancing toward them. For the first time since breaking free, the void stalker looked uncertain. Jake took a slow step forward. Not aggressive, not threatening, but deliberate and controlled. The creature watched. His movement with intense focus, as if trying to decode some message it couldn't quite understand. "Jake, what are you doing?" Lyra breathed. "Don't move toward it. You're supposed to run away from the scary monster, not walk up to it." But Jake was operating on instincts that had nothing to do with running away. Every movement he made was calculated and purposeful. He kept his shoulders squared, his stance balanced, and his eyes locked on the predator's face. The void stalker made another sound, deeper this time. Jake recognized it as the challenge call Professor Kethfer had mentioned. Earlier, the creature was trying to intimidate him, to trigger the flight response that should have sent him running like all the others. Instead, Jake made his own sound. It was deeper than anything he had ever produced before, rumbling up from his chest. With surprising power, the sound seemed to resonate through the room, and Jake saw the creature actually take another step backward. For the first time in its life, the void stalker was looking at something that didn't act like prey. This human wasn't running, wasn't showing fear, wasn't displaying any of the behaviors that usually preceded a successful hunt. Instead, it was acting like something else entirely. It was acting like another predator. Jake took another step forward, his movements slow and controlled. He could see the confusion in the creature's eyes now. The void stalker had encountered many different species in its lifetime, but they all fell into predictable categories. Prey ran. Competitors fought. But this human was doing neither. The creature's nostrils flared as it tried to scent Jake's emotional state. Most prey gave off powerful fear pheromones when confronted by a predator. But Jake's scent was different. There was alertness, yes, and adrenaline, but not the sharp tang of terror that the creature expected. Jake raised his hands slowly, palms facing the void stalker. His fingers were spread wide, and Lyra gasped when she saw that his nails seemed longer and sharper than she remembered. Jake's whole posture had changed. He stood differently now, moved differently, even breathed differently. The void stalker lowered its head slightly, a gesture that in its species indicated wariness rather than aggression. It was beginning to understand that this encounter was not going to follow the usual pattern of predator and prey. From somewhere in the distance, Jake could hear shouting. Security forces were mobilizing, trying to figure out how to deal with the escaped predator. But their voices seemed far away and unimportant. All that mattered was this moment, this meeting of two very different types of hunter. Jake made a clicking sound with his tongue, similar to the sounds the creature had made earlier during the lesson. The void stalker's head snapped up, its eyes focusing intently on Jake's face. It clicked back, a complex series of sounds that seemed almost like a question. Jake didn't understand the meaning, but he sensed the tone. The creature was trying to communicate, to understand what Jake was and why he wasn't behaving like normal prey. Jake responded with his own series of clicks and low sounds. Letting his instincts guide him, the conversation continued for several minutes. Neither Jake nor the Void Stalker moved from their positions, but they exchanged a variety of sounds. To anyone listening, it might have sounded like nonsense, but both participants seemed to understand something important was happening. Lyra watched in amazement, as her human friend appeared to have an actual conversation with one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. The Void Stalker's entire posture had changed. It no longer looked like it was preparing to attack. Instead, it seemed genuinely interested in understanding Jake. "I don't believe what I'm seeing," Professor Kethvar's voice came from near the doorway. He had returned with a team of security personnel, but they had all stopped when they saw the strange scene playing out in the classroom. The Void Stalker glanced toward the new arrivals, and Jake saw its muscles tense. The creature viewed the armed security team as a potential threat, and its predatory instincts were kicking in again. Jake immediately made a sharp sound, drawing the creature's attention back to him. When their eyes met again, Jake slowly shook his head and made a calming gesture with his hands. The Void Stalker seemed to understand and relaxed slightly, though it kept glancing at the security team. "Nobody move," Jake called out, his voice carrying a note of authority that surprised everyone, including himself. "Don't make any sudden movements or loud noises. It sees you as a threat." "Mr. Morrison," Professor Kethvar said carefully, "please step away from the creature slowly. We have tranquilizer weapons that can subdue it safely." "No," Jake said firmly. "If you try to drug it now, you'll trigger its defense responses. It might attack before the tranquilizers take effect." The Void Stalker was watching the exchange with obvious intelligence. It seemed to understand that the newcomers were discussing what to do about it. Even if it couldn't understand the specific words, Jake turned his attention back to the creature and made a series of soft sounds. The Void Stalker responded, and Jake found himself nodding as if he actually understood what it was saying. "Jake," Lyra whispered, "how are you doing this? How are you talking to it?" Jake paused, considering her question. He wasn't entirely sure how he was communicating with the Void Stalker. The sounds and gestures seemed to come naturally, as if he was accessing some deeper part of his mind that knew how to speak the universal language of predators. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "It just feels right." The Void Stalker took a step closer to Jake, moving with careful deliberation. Jake didn't retreat. Instead, he stood his ground and maintained eye contact. When the creature was just a few feet away, it stopped and extended one clawed hand toward him. Jake looked at the extended hand for a moment, then slowly reached out with his own. Their hands met in the space between them, human skin touching. Alien scales. The Void Stalker's claws were longer than Jake's fingers, but its touch was surprisingly gentle. For a long moment, they stayed like that, two predators from different worlds acknowledging each other as equals. The Void Stalker made a soft sound that Jake somehow knew was the expression of respect. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the moment ended. The creature stepped back and looked around the room one more time. Its gaze lingered on the security team with their weapons, then returned to Jake. The Void Stalker made one final sound, a complex series of clicks and growls that seemed almost like a farewell. Then it turned and walked calmly toward the far wall of the classroom, where large windows looked out onto the academy grounds. "It's leaving," Professor Kethvar said in amazement. "It's actually choosing to leave." The creature paused at the window and looked back at Jake one more time. Jake nodded slightly and the Void Stalker seemed to smile. Then it shattered the window with a single blow and leaped through the opening, disappearing into the academy's vast grounds. Jake stood in the silence that followed, his heart still racing but his mind strangely calm. Around him, everyone stared in shock at what they had just witnessed. A human had faced down a Void Stalker and lived. More than that, he had somehow earned the creature's respect and convinced it to leave peacefully. Nobody quite knew what to make of it, least of all Jake himself. The silence in the classroom lasted for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few seconds. Everyone stared at the broken window where the Void Stalker had disappeared. Glass crunched under someone's feet as they shifted nervously, but nobody spoke. Jake felt strange. The intense focus that had taken over his mind was fading, leaving him feeling almost dizzy. His hands were shaking slightly, and he realized that his body was only now catching up to what his mind had just experienced. "Jake," Lyra said softly, still leaning against him for support. "What just happened? What did you do?" Before Jake could answer, Professor Kethver approached them carefully. The Zenthri's large eyes were wide with amazement and something that might have been fear. He stopped several feet away, as if he wasn't quite sure it was safe to get too close to Jake. "Mr. Morrison," the professor said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you know how to communicate with that creature?" Jake looked at his professor, then at the security guards who were still standing by the door with their weapons drawn. Everyone was staring at him with expressions he had never seen before. It wasn't just curiosity or amazement. There was something deeper in their eyes, something that looked almost like fear. "I don't know," Jake said honestly. "I just did what felt right." "What felt right?" one of the security guards repeated. "You had a conversation with a void stalker. You touched it. You made it leave without hurting anyone. That's not something that just feels right to most people." Dr. Nina Carter entered the classroom at that moment, followed by several other Academy officials. Jake had met Dr. Carter before. She was the human xenobiologist who served as his mentor at the Academy. She was also one of the few people who really understood what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of other species. "Is everyone all right?" Dr. Carter asked, quickly scanning the room. Her eyes stopped on Jake and Lyra, and she hurried over to them. "Are either of you injured?" Lyra hurt her leg, Jake said. "She needs medical attention." Dr. Carter immediately called for medical personnel, then turned her attention to Jake. Unlike the others, she didn't look afraid of him. Instead, she looked thoughtful and perhaps a little sad. "Jake," she said quietly, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened here." Jake explained the events as best he could remember them. The containment failure, the panic, Lyra's fall, and his decision to stand between her and the Predator. As he spoke, Dr. Carter nodded occasionally, but her expression grew more serious. "And you say you communicated with the creature?" she asked. "I think so. We made sounds at each other, and it seemed to understand what I meant." Professor Kethver stepped forward. "Dr. Carter, I've been studying predator behavior for over 2 centuries. What I witnessed today should have been impossible. No sentient species has ever successfully communicated with a void stalker in the wild. They simply don't interact with other species except as predator and prey." Dr. Carter was quiet for a moment, considering this information. Then she looked at Jake with an expression that seemed almost apologetic. "Jake, I think it's time you learn some things about your own species that we haven't discussed before." "What do you mean?" Jake asked. The medical team arrived and began examining Lyra's injured leg. While they worked, Dr. Carter continued talking to Jake. When humans first made contact with the galactic community, there was a lot of debate about how to classify your species. Most races in the galaxy evolved from prey animals or peaceful omnivores. They developed intelligence as a way to avoid predators and solve problems cooperatively. Jake listened, wondering where this was leading. "But humans are different, Doctor," Carter continued. "Your species evolved on what we call a death world. Earth is an incredibly dangerous planet by galactic standards. The gravity is higher than most worlds, the weather is violent and unpredictable, and the native life forms are extraordinarily aggressive." Professor Kethver nodded. "We've studied Earth's ecosystem. The predators on your world are unlike anything found on most civilized planets. The competition for survival was so intense that it forced rapid evolution." "But what does that have to do with what happened today?" Jake asked. Dr. Carter smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. "Jake, humans didn't survive on Earth by running away from predators. You survived by becoming better predators yourselves. Your species developed intelligence, tool use, and cooperation specifically to hunt creatures that were bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than you were." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He thought about his reaction to the Void Stalker, how natural it had felt to stand his ground instead of running, how he had instinctively known how to communicate with the creature using sounds and gestures. He had never learned. "You're saying we're predators?" Jake asked. "You're apex predators," Dr. Carter corrected. "The most successful hunting species your planet has ever produced. You hunted megafauna to extinction, dominated every ecosystem. You entered and eventually became the only intelligent species on your world because you were too good at survival." One of the security guards made a nervous sound. "Are you saying humans are dangerous?" Dr. Carter looked at the guard with the expression that was both patient and slightly annoyed. "Humans are only dangerous if they choose to be. That's what makes them remarkable. They have all the instincts and capabilities of apex predators, but they've chosen to be civilized instead." Jake thought about this as the medical team finished treating Lyra. They had determined that her leg was sprained but not broken, and they helped her to a more comfortable position. "But why didn't anyone tell me this before?" Jake asked. "Because we weren't sure how you would react," Dr. Carter admitted. "Most humans who come to the Academy are from Earth's more peaceful regions. They've never had to use their predatory instincts, so they don't even know they have them. You're the first human student we've had who accessed those instincts so completely." Professor Kethver cleared his throat. "Dr. Carter, if I may ask, how common is this kind of behavior among humans?" "More common than you might think," she replied. "Humans have been successful in every environment they've encountered, no matter how dangerous. They've survived in places that would kill most other species within hours. They've hunted creatures that other races consider to be mythical monsters." Jake looked around the room at all the faces staring at him. His classmates, his professor, the security guards, all of them were seeing him differently now. He was no longer just the friendly human exchange student. He was something else entirely. "So what happens now?" Jake asked. "Now you continue your studies," Dr. Carter said firmly, "but with a better understanding of what you are and where you come from. The galaxy needs to understand that humans aren't just another species. You're something unique, something that can bridge the gap between civilization and the wild." Over the following days, word of what had happened in the xenobiology classroom spread throughout the academy. Jake found that his relationships with other students had changed dramatically. Some were afraid of him now, giving him wide berths in the hallways and avoiding eye contact. Others were fascinated, asking endless questions about human capabilities and Earth's dangerous environment, but most surprising to Jake was how his own self-perception had changed. He began to notice things he had never paid attention to before. The way he moved through crowded spaces, always positioning himself to see potential threats. The way his eyes automatically tracked movement in his peripheral vision. The way he could sense when someone was approaching from behind. These weren't new abilities. They had always been there, part of his genetic inheritance from countless generations of human hunters. He had just never recognized them for what they were. Lyra was one of the few students who didn't treat him differently. If anything, she seemed more comfortable around him than before. "You saved my life," she told him one day as they sat in the Academy's garden. "I don't care what kind of predator you are. You chose to protect me instead of saving yourself. That's what matters." Jake nodded, grateful for her friendship. He was still learning to accept what he was, but Lyra's acceptance helped. Professor Kethver had also changed his approach to teaching. He began including more information about Deathworld species and their unique evolutionary paths. The Void Stalker incident had taught him that the galaxy was more complex and dangerous than he had previously understood. As for the Void Stalker itself, it was eventually recaptured in the Academy's outer gardens, but when the security team found it, the creature was sitting calmly by a small pond, almost as if it had been waiting for them. It offered no resistance when they brought it back to Containment. Jake visited the creature once more before it was returned to its homeworld. When he approached the new containment unit, the Void Stalker looked at him with what seemed like recognition. It made the same soft clicking sounds they had shared during their encounter, and Jake clicked back. For a moment, two predators from different worlds acknowledged each other once again. Then Jake turned and walked away, knowing that he would never forget the day he discovered what it truly meant to be human. The galaxy was a vast and dangerous place, full of creatures and environments that could destroy the unwary. But humans had evolved to thrive in such places, to hunt the hunters and survive the unsurvivable.